Today we're going to be going over evolution. We know that evolution is the gradual change of a species over time. Darwin, which is a scientist that developed a theory of evolution, proposes this idea of evolution happening through natural selection. So you can see that natural selection in here is a mechanism for change in a population. This occurs when organisms with favorable variations for a particular environment survive, reproduce, and pass these variations on to the next generation. So basically what they're saying here is that natural selection is favoring particular species that have favorable traits. So for example, if I have a tree trunk and a worm in the middle of the tree, and then I have two different birds, one on the left side and one on the right side, trying to get the worm inside. The bird on one side has a short beak and the bird on the right side has a long beak. So we know, if we're just looking at the different bird beak sizes, that the bird with the long beak is going to be able to get the worm, not the one with the short beak. Thus, the bird with the long beak has a favorable variation, because since he's able to get the worm, is going to be able to feed his offspring, and as a result, his offspring are then going to survive and reproduce, and his trait is being passed on, since his gene is staying in the gene pool. While since the bird with the short beak is not getting the food, his traits are then going to slowly begin to die off in the population until they become extinct. Now, in order for natural selection to occur, one of the number one requirements is that there be variation within a population. Since natural selection is choosing or pressuring two different traits, the trait that is the advantageous or the advantage, and then the trait that has the disadvantageous trait or the disadvantage. So in the example before, when we talked about the bird with the long beak versus the bird with the short beak, the long beak in this case would be the advantageous trait, the one that's giving him the advantage to survive and reproduce, while the bird with the short beak has a disadvantageous trait. Thus, his traits are going to slowly die off until he becomes extinct. So when we're looking at this, we're seeing two different traits. So in order for us to have natural selection, we need to have a variation, meaning more than one example for that particular trait. As the species struggle to survive, the advantageous traits, or the traits that are more favorable for survival, begin to appear more and more within the population. Just like when we look at giraffes, giraffes with longer neck get better food, thus they have more babies, they have a higher fitness, thus more children are being born with longer necks, so that trait is being passed along more at a higher frequency, thus changing the allele frequency, meaning that the allele that is coding for longer necks is going to be appearing more often, thus it's going to increase. And as a result of that increase, the neck size is just going to almost permanently increase the average neck size, because it has now become a constant in the population. So the struggle for existence is called survival of the fittest. So survival of the fittest, we're having these two different species with two different traits compete to see who is going to be able to survive long enough to reproduce and at a high enough frequency that that trait begins to take over the entire population. Now, species need to adapt in order to survive. Now, those adaptations occur in two types, both structural, meaning the actual body is changing, and physiological, meaning the function is changing. Two structural adaptations. One is mimicry. So the key word here is mimic. So the species is mimicking the appearance of another species, and I'll show you a picture in a minute. And then the second one is camouflage. In this case, the species is not mimicking another species, yet the species is blending in with its environment. So in the example here, you can see that the species here on the right side has taken on a similar phenotype in terms of how the snake is decorated. So that when a predator would come, they would see that the snake almost looks like the coral snake, which is the venomous one. Thus, the predator would then stay away, giving him a chance for survival. In camouflage, in this case, they are not changing to mimic another species. They're changing to blend in with the background. So as you can see, the frog in the top corner here, the bird in this case here, and then the insect in this picture here. The other type of adaptation is physiological adaptation, and this is mostly with resistance. So when I talk about if I have 100 mosquitoes and I spray them with mosquito spray, but I only kill 97 of them, the 3 that survive are resistant to the mosquito spray, so then those survive and reproduce. So eventually, the next time I spray, I only kill 75, then I only kill 50, 25, 5, and then I have to create an even stronger mosquito spray to kill that type of mosquito, because all I'm doing is only killing off the weak and only leaving the strong. The first type of structure we're going to be looking at is homologous. So you can see in the keyword here, homo meaning same. So here I have 3 different species. I have the whale, the crocodile, and the bird. Although we may have thought that they are 3 unrelated species, they all have something in common. When we look at their bone structure, they all have the same similar bones. Yet their bones have changed in order to give them the best advantage in their environment. The whale for swimming, the crocodile with claws to get food, and the bird with these elongated fingers in order to help it fly. But since all of them have similar bone structures, we can say that they all came from a common ancestor. So we can say that all of these animals, including ourselves, all came from a species or organism far back enough that then diverged into all these different species as we begin to change to adapt. A vestigial structure is a structure that our body still produces, but that we no longer need. So for example, wisdom teeth. Our body still produces wisdom teeth, yet we don't need them. In snakes, although snakes do not have any feet, their body still produces 2 hind legs in the back, yet they do not protrude, so it looks like they're this long cylinder shape with no feet, yet their body still produces feet. Whales are another one. They still produce 2 back legs, yet the fin grows out instead. So these are instances in which we know that we have evolved over time, because at one time these structures were needed, but now they are no longer needed for existence, yet we still produce them. So proving to us that we have evolved to no longer need these things, meaning that at one time we did. So analogous structures are different than homologous. So homologous, we had similar bones, yet they were all very different. And analogous, the structures are the same, yet the 2 species are unrelated. So the 2 species, so for example, in the picture that I will show you, you're going to see an insect wing and a bird wing. A bird is a mammal, and then a butterfly is an insect. So we have 2 unrelated species, yet they both have wings. One wing is made out of carbohydrates, which is why you hear the crunch when you step on them, and the other one is made out of actual bones and feathers. So they have the same structured wings to fly, yet 2 unrelated species. So what this tells us is that if I put 2 different species under the same pressure, so I pressure 2 different species, the bird and the insect, or the butterfly, and if I pressure them the same, both of the species adapted in the same way, and the adaptation was to fly. So, since they're 2 unrelated, they do not show common ancestry. They just show that same environmental pressure, same adaptation. So you can see in the example, cartilage wings, bird wings, same structure, 2 unrelated species. Embryology, the key word is embryo. Embryo is the key word that we use to identify a particular child in its earliest forms, the fetus. So you can see here that we have 4 unrelated species, yet when we look back at their earliest embryos, we all look very similar. So because we look similar at the embryonic stage, when we are growing, we can then say that all of these species came from a common ancestor, which is why we all look very similar at the earliest stages. But as we get older and begin to develop, we begin to differentiate into the 4 different species. But at the earliest stages of development, we see that we are all similar, suggesting that we all came from a common ancestor and then diverged into different species. And the last one is biochemistry. So in biochemistry, we're looking at DNA and amino acids. And in this case, we're looking at how two different species are similar to each other. So for example, when we look at the humans and we look at a monkey and we compare their DNA bases and their DNA sequences, we are a 98% match to each other, suggesting that both humans and monkeys evolved from a common ancestor. The common misconception is that they say humans evolved from apes, which is incorrect. Because we are so similar, we did not evolve from apes, yet apes and us as humans evolved from a common ancestor that diverged to create apes and us as humans.